Richard E. Grant, I just love him. So I don't know that he necessarily has a particular nerd cachet. I don't think he identifies as a nerd, but I have always loved him. From, I mean, name a thing that he's been in. Although I will say this, the letter, like when you approach these actors, I would send a letter before even speaking to them. It's like, here's why I want you to be in the movie. This is why you're perfect. The movie that I referenced in the letter to him was Hudson Hawk.
Would you like to swing on a star? Carry moonbeams home in a jar.
I know he hates that movie now, I've learned, but I, as a kid, thought it was amazing.
We can't go on like this. I'm a trained actor reduced to the stakes of a bum.
Hi guys, thanks very much.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Hi, thanks. So first of all, congratulations on the festival pickup.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is the first feature that I've worked on, and although I sent some of the old short films like to festivals, they were always in places that I was never. You know, it's a different scale, I guess, than trying to get a feature into a festival. I guess I'd hoped that would be the end result, but when we, as my first feature, I hadn't even, really even getting to the point where we could show it to other human beings felt like such a Herculean task that I guess I hadn't really considered the festival angle at all until suddenly it was happening, and here we are.
I always wanted to take it to a festival. One of us was thinking of it, so yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah,
it's very atypical, not for I mean, there are obviously animated movies and stuff, but this is like this epic kind of very 70s style animation. Is not your typical.
No.
Yeah,
No, it's not.
Can you tell me about the genesis of why you went for this angle, this animation? Was it because it's such a big epic movie that you wanted to kind of take it as far as possible, and animation was the way to go?
Oh, for sure. I think. I mean, barring hundreds of millions of dollars to get the cast on the peak of a snowy mountain necropolis, I think animation was the only way to really get us there. For sure, we were referencing, the films from like the late 70s and early 80s, like, Ralph Bakshi and Heavy Metal and all of that stuff. So, I mean, we very much wanted it to look and feel like those as much as we could manage. And so, doing it in the style is kind of like the only way to do it right. I mean, I personally drew quite a bit of it, and we and had done several short films, animating them on my own prior to that. And so I was already sort of working in trying to capture that aesthetic. And yeah, once we got to the phase where we were bringing on other animators, it was a tricky process of finding people who both could do the style exactly like I was hoping it would turn out, because there's a lot of different ways people rotoscope. We were really trying to do it specifically in the way that Ralph Bakshi did it in the his peak rotoscope era. So finding people who could both do it and had the patience for the long hours it takes was a real task. It was tough.
And what about the actual the topics itself that the film deals with? I mean, it's set in this fantasy world that feels like 100 million years ago, but it feels so timely and so much part of the zeitgeist. When you wrote it, was that something that you wanted to kind of? I imagine so. You wanted to bring sort of politics in there, but now with everything that's gone on this past kind of 12 months, it must have all just kind of like, whoa. We've kind of, it really has become even more timely. The toxicity of power, for example, all these things really kind of play into the zeitgeist, no?
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, for human history, the toxicity of power is probably like an evergreen thematic. So I would love to say that we were prescient, but it might just be we were cynical about mankind. But yeah, I mean, part and parcel to what Morgan was saying about how we were trying to evoke a certain style, like the Ralph Bakshi style of the 70s. I mean, I think that there is, for me, like fantasy fiction and imaginative fiction is at its best when it is like sort of sharp thematically, and whether that means political or whether it just means sort of provocative in its themes. That's just how I think the genre is when it's at its best. So that was, definitely all went into the thinking in terms of writing it and making it. We just happened to have finished the film at the end of a particularly brutal period of abuses of power and et cetera, et cetera. So,
But in terms of the fantasy themes, where did you draw the inspiration from that? I mean, you mentioned a little bit kind of like the art style, but what kind of inspirations? It felt very much kind of Lord of the Rings inspired type thematics. No, where did your inspiration come from to kind of bring timely topics into a fantasy tale?
I mean, we definitely were. I mean, as much as I think we're both huge fans of the work from the 70s, and it itself, draws so much from like adventure and horror fiction from like, weird fiction from the 30s, that, that there are limitations to some of that, where it feels like there's a lot of ways that when you show someone any of that older stuff, I mean, I saw heavy metal in the theater right before COVID shut everything down, like at a retro screening. And like you could tell that the audience was much younger, and like they weren't being titillated by it. They were embarrassed by some of it. Like it feels, I love it, but it feels retrograde in a lot of ways. And it's like, if we're going to evoke this older style, like it felt like this was an opportunity to, I mean, modernize it in a way that it didn't even get modernized last time it sort of came back around. The sort of low fantasy Conan boom of the 80s. So yeah, I mean, I guess it was a very intentional to try to bring in modern politics and to like engage with the genre through a like political and social lens.
Mentioned that you obviously you decided to go with animation because there was no way you're going to get an ensemble cast on the top of a mountain. No, but you did manage to pull off a pretty dream team cast. No,
so I mean, Betty Gabriel from Get Out is the only cast member that we started with way back when we shot the live action. So she was in the warehouse with us, and she is the like motion reference for that character, and then came back much later to do her voice. All the other main cast came on really towards the end of the process, when we needed to redo our sound and we were going out and trying to find voices. So as you say, yeah, we started basically that we were trying to think of actors who we thought might dig this thing, like who out there might love a violent, naked, psychedelic fantasy film. And the first name that came into our mind was Joe Manganiello, because of D&D and because it just sort of it seems to fit his persona. He has this t-shirt company, it just that like extreme genre feels like very much his brand. So we started with him. I mean, after we already had Betty, and then from there we tried to again just think of other people who we know like, and again I say the term with love, who like nerdy stuff, right? So that's how we ended up with Patton. It's how we ended up. It's not how we ended up with Lucy. I don't know that she really necessarily identifies as a nerd, but she clearly just comes from that genre world, and she's so just like royalty in that sense of of that specific type of genre. So yeah, and Richard Grant, I just love him. So I don't know that he necessarily has a particular nerd cachet. I don't think he identifies as a nerd, but I have always loved him. From, I mean, name a thing that he's been in. Although I will say this, the letter, like when you approach these actors, I would send a letter before even speaking to them. It's like, here's why I want you to be in the movie. This is why you're perfect. The movie that I referenced in the letter to him was Hudson Hawk.
Would you like to swing on a star? Carry moonbeams home in a jar.
I know he hates that movie now, I've learned, but I, as a kid, thought it was amazing, and he is fantastic in it. So, yeah.
So people can love Hudson Hawk now for the fact that it brought him to your project.
Sometimes you got to reference Hudson Hawk, it's just it's how life goes.
So I want to talk a little bit. I mean, something that I loved about the animation is the motion of the characters. They're very, very realistic.
Well, I mean, the rotoscoping process fundamentally is like we shot the entire film in live action in a warehouse, in 2014, spring 2014. And then we're able to, we cut the entire film in the live action form. I mean, it's missing so many elements, backgrounds and everything, but except the performances. But so we used the, when it became time to animate it, we were referencing the live action video that we'd filmed. So I think at least to an extent, like it's still a traditional, like sort of frame by frame onion skin hand-drawn process. So it's very much that, but underneath that, we have the layer of the per frame of the live action. So you have a reference for like perspective and timing and proportion when you feel like you need to refer to something to keep it within that realistic confines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then just to wrap up, then I wanted to ask, I've got to talk about we talked about the animation, but I want to talk about the actual gore, because it's ultra violent. And a lot of times, even though it's just animation, if you go too far or you don't go far enough, people are not going to kind of get on with it. But it worked really well. It really goes out there, but it doesn't kind of, it's gone too far. Was it difficult to kind of draw a limit and set yourself a limit there, how you wanted to go with that?
I mean, I thought we had gone too far. I'm a little insulted.
No. It doesn't feel like really.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know that we ever explicitly discussed how violent it. I don't know that I could draw an equation for how we knew where that line was. I think it was just sort of, we knew that we wanted it to be violent and violent enough that it would be attention getting. I guess I think about RoboCop a lot in terms of like RoboCop's violence, which is like certainly over the top, but it never, and occasionally in that movie it's used for comedic effect. I don't know that we didn't really use it for comedic effect, but I don't know, like I guess I would say my bar is RoboCop. I don't know if that's a useful distinction or not.
I think too that there was when drawing it, because I saved all the fun gore shots for myself for the most part, rather than having someone else do it, just because it's a lot of fun to draw. Yeah. But tonally, I wanted it to feel, I wanted people to feel the weight of the violence. Like if you're going to have this much violence on screen, I feel like you don't want it sanitized, because like violence is horrible. So like just trying to strike the balance between that and also having it being entertaining in like a Sam Raimi way. It's like I wanted to be, I wanted to feel serious, but then also not be a lot of suffering necessarily. So yeah, I think there's some intentionality there, but again, I think we both are just super huge fans of RoboCop.
Well, thanks so much for your time. I wish you the best of luck with the film when it screens South by, and I hope to speak to you again sometime in the near future.
Yes, thank you so much.
There are things that man must not know.